Now, in order to understand where American society, American culture got its ideas of liberties and freedoms from, we begin with the Protestant Reformation, or more accurately, the Protestant legacy of liberties and freedoms. The thing about it is that Protestant culture, Protestant behaviors, Protestant practices have long been associated with greater freedoms and liberties. And that is something we're going to see as we track the growth, spread, and trajectory of American values. Historians have long associated Protestant countries with greater freedoms and liberties. And this is something that has been backed up by studies in other fields. For example, one article was a meta-analysis. This article concluded that countries which had a Protestant Christian background ranked higher on scores of freedoms and liberties. Now, this idea has not been contested. There have been a number of studies, most recently, which have argued the opposite trend, that Protestant culture had its own sense of authoritarianism. In fact, one of the 20th century's most well-known culture historians, George L. Mosse, questioned the main narrative of whether Protestantism actually led to greater freedoms and democracies. He rhetorically asked what was the debt that modern society owes to Protestantism, such as Calvinism. He ultimately concluded that the link between Protestantism and freedom was not as clear-cut as has been portrayed. Now, for our story of American rights and freedoms, we will take the long popularized view that Protestant culture did indeed foster and promote the growth of ideas of freedom and liberty. In fact, a point made by numerous historians was the Protestant authoritarian culture of violence and persecution is what directly led to the Protestant culture of freedom and liberty. It was a kind of a relationship in which the Protestant side of authoritarianism and the Protestant side of liberty fed off each other and, in some sense, encouraged each other in different directions. And indeed, the legacy of Protestantism in the United States, in American culture, in American history, embodies both the authoritarian and free side of Protestant culture. You see both of these in American history, this double-sided nature to Protestant culture and values. So to return to our beginning, does Protestant culture lead to greater freedom and democracy? Well, I'd argue in some ways yes, and in some ways no. For this history of American values, I take the perspective that religion is a tool. It's not necessarily authoritarian or free and liberal by itself. It's how individuals use these religious ideas that make the ideas either more authoritarian or more liberal or more free. In our story of American rights and liberties, American Protestantism embodies both this double-sided nature of freedom and restriction. Now, we begin our story in an era in which Europe was united under a single denomination of Catholicism. Yet, this unification under a single religion did not necessarily mean unity. In fact, festering under the surface of this supposed unity were long-standing grievances against the Catholic Church that would eventually erupt. And many of these grievances would erupt with the Protestant Reformation. In fact, our story begins with Martin Luther. Martin Luther was a young Augustinian monk, a Catholic monk, whose intense religious beliefs and feelings sparked the Protestant Reformation, which broke the unity of Europe. On October 31st, 1517, Martin Luther had had enough. He recorded his list of grievances in a document called the 95 Theses, and he nailed them to the door of Wittenberg Castle. Now, this document radically challenged the Catholic Church. It laid out some pretty heavy grievances which were revolutionary. His biggest problem was the Catholic Church minimized the importance of the Bible. The Catholic Church argued that you need to go to the priests, the official institutions of the church, to be saved. And Martin Luther did not like this. He believed the Bible should have more importance than it did in society. Another grievance Martin Luther had was the fact that he believed the church was corrupt because they were putting sacraments for sale. A common grievance was the sale of indulgences, basically a way for rich people to buy themselves into heaven. And Martin Luther did not like this because he saw the impoverished of his society scraping and saving all their money to buy an indulgence, which Martin Luther believed did not do anything. Martin Luther believed that the church had lost sight of its original vision. It had lost sight of its goal of spreading Christianity and had become corrupt. Martin Luther sought to bring people back into proper practices. And for this, he stressed the self-study of the Bible. Martin Luther argued that you do not need to go through the Catholic Church in order to be saved. You only need faith to be saved. This was a radical sidestepping of the Catholic Church, which the Catholic Church did not like. but nonetheless, the church could not stop these radical ideas from spreading. This opposition to the papacy, to the Pope, to the church was felt by numerous Europeans who shared similar beliefs and similar grievances against the church. This movement for reform, which becomes known as the Reformation, spreads beyond its German locality. The followers of these new reformist doctrines and the followers of Martin Luther become known as Lutherans, one of the first denominations of Protestantism. Now keep in mind, Luther's goal was not to destroy the Catholic Church. He was trying to purify the Catholic Church, to restore the Christian community to its original origins as it existed under the days of Christ and the disciples. Nonetheless, his ideas spread throughout the trading routes which connected European cities. German merchants carried these new reformist doctrines into the Baltic states and Scandinavia. These ideas eventually reached Denmark, where King Christian II adopted Protestantism as the official state religion of Denmark. The spread of these ideas received support from new preachers who carried on this momentum, who carried on this spiritual revolution, amongst the most important of which was John Calvin. John Calvin was originally from France and too joined in on the criticisms against the Catholic Church. Calvin called on the King of France to end the religious persecution of this growing reformers, demanding change. Calvin's ideas took root in France and formed the basis of a growing French Protestant community. From France, Calvinism spread to the Netherlands, and then to Hungary and Transylvania, Poland, and eventually Scotland.